Hello, thank you for joining us today. We're here to discuss managing the security risks that we're seeing posed by employees' IoT devices. I'm Keith Fuentes. I'm with Samsung and I run our customer success team. I'm excited to be joined by Senior Analyst Chris Sherman of Forrester, who works with securing his professionals' risk and security. Chris, do you mind taking a moment introducing yourself?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Keith. Thanks for having me today. So I've been covering mobile security and endpoint security, and now most recently IoT security for several years here at Forrester. And I think this is a very timely session, right? Given what's going on today, and with the crisis, just the sudden rise in home workers. I think is very timely, and I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. Thought we could start the discussion, maybe getting your opinion and seeing some reviews that you guys have had on the zero trust strategy when it comes to mobile devices.
Sure. So several years ago, we here at Forrester, we developed the ZeroTrust model, right, of network architecture, really to help combat this, rise in managed and unmanaged assets, right, in the workplace. And really, a central tenet to this was helping to identify different isolation levels that are appropriate based on that risk, right, to eliminate static determinations of trust, right? That's just so prevalent today in IT and security overall. During our presentation today, I'll talk more about this, but I just think it's useful to start off to show some data here that this shows what the level of concern is at the C level, right? Good news is it's clear that there's concern, right, at the C level, at the top. In fact, in Forrester's annual security survey of 3,800 decision makers, we showed that the data came back and showed that concern over unmanaged devices is actually a top priority. And this has risen pretty steadily over the past few years. And another top concern was data protection concerning those devices. And, just with over 20 billion devices predicted to be in the marketplace by 2024, and actually 1 trillion by 2030, right? The attack surface is clearly growing. So, the main issue really is the total number of areas that's exposed to sensitive data. The total attack surface, right, of an organization, it's rapidly expanding and has been for decades, really, right? And just to maybe define this, we call all of those areas of the business, all of those digital areas of the business that can be exploited, it's attack surface, or in other words, the total sum of all the exploitable areas of the IT surface that can serve as a conduit of attack. And this really starts with the corporate controlled IT environment, right? But extends out to less controlled areas, or assets specifically, right? Such as rogue devices, personal devices, social media, and as I point out here, third parties, right, which you have no control over. And I've shown this here. If you look at this side there, you have the concentric rings, right, really starting with that core IT infrastructure, with shadow IT just outside this area of control. And actually, in fact, the shadow IT represents a significant problem for enterprises. These are the devices and the apps that your employees are using to get work done that aren't necessarily sanctioned by IT, but they might be useful to getting their work done. And actually, I have a data point on that. Our survey data, same survey, the Business Technographics Security Survey here at Forrester, it shows that 39% of users, right, go around IT, that use shadow IT resources, right, do so because they feel it's the most efficient way to get work done. And really, as security, we need to have a strategy that reduces the risk of attacks coming in through, these less controlled assets. But, unfortunately, the problem is, many just have simply layered more and more, many organizations just layer more and more technologies to try to address this, more security technologies, right? And this really just adds the complexity. In fact, I recently did a study where we surveyed a bunch of security decision makers, and we found that the average enterprise has 6.5, depending on the number of assets or employees in their organization, it ranges from 6.5 to 12 security agents per device. And this really isn't the solution. Next slide, please. Yeah. So what's the outcome, right? Well, probably shouldn't come as any surprise, but we see just about half of organizations dealing with data breaches on a yearly basis. 56% specifically. And I can tell you, they're especially at risk. Just given, you know, uh, um, just the amount of ransomware today, for example, right? And actually, healthcare in particular, that's one area of specialization for me. That's where I came from before Forrester. Um, and also we have data here on malicious insiders, right? We also often, will trust the users, right? But as the creator of ZeroTrust, John Kindervag used to say, right, people aren't packets, right? You can't statically assign trust, in the same way as you would like an IT asset. But in fact, actually, you need to eliminate trust assumptions across the board, right? And this is actually going to be the foundation of what I'll be talking about today, for the rest of my presentation. So when I started talking about ZeroTrust actually with John, the major issue back then, as it still remains today, is just the decreasing efficacy of that perimeter, first or perimeter only model, right? Really, networks are too broadly laid out to protect the network, just with a perimeter only, strategy, right? Data moves in and out of controlled and uncontrolled areas of the network, and or between like those concentric rings I showed before, right? Trust is often given, but it's static, right? It's static in the sense that once a device is allowed onto the network, it's often given free reign to just move, in and out of that network, or come back without any future analysis as to whether or not like the risk posture, has changed with that device, whether or not really ultimately should it be trusted. It's just simply trusted. And this gives attackers, a good conduit to enter the network and use some of these blind spots to, against them, right? Eliminating this trust is really fundamental to zero trust overall, right? Especially for mobile devices. And, as I mentioned before, cybersecurity is a C-level concern, but why are they just now turning to zero trust? Well, many, because we've been talking about this for frankly over a decade, right? Um, but I would say, many both inside and outside the security industry, have heard of the zero trust model lately because of the U.S. government's adoption of the strategy and subsequent NIST guidance on the topic, right, last year. So let's dive into the latest zero trust model here. You see the ZTX model. This is the latest version released by our team. Basically we broaden it out past just the network, right? Because that's where it frankly was before hiring actually a Chase Cunningham, who's our lead right now in Zero Trust for the team. And we've extended it out beyond just the network. Now it includes devices, users, people, workloads, all centered around protecting sensitive data. And really fundamental to this approach is having visibility and control over all of those assets that might be coming into the organization, into the network, or leaving, requesting access to sensitive resources, right? And you need orchestration tying all of your technology, operations together, right? And we often get asked, what technology enables zero trust? This really is the wrong way to look at it, right? Zero trust is a philosophy, that has implications for every security layer. No single product is going to deliver zero trust or ZTX, right? It's really a combination of products and different strategies for those layers, right? To deliver security, based on actual risk. And the idea is you don't want to have any automatic assumptions of trust, right? So a good way to think about zero trust, or maybe even cyber threats as a whole, is to assume that you've already been compromised. You just simply, don't know it yet. That's really an important and critical mindset, just given today's environment. Trust but verify, really, this is something John would always say, right? It leaves you flat-footed and really just sets you up for, more crisis management. Zero trust may seem kind of stark, but it's really, that proactive element that, architectural approach that really helps you align with your mission priorities. It simply isn't a question of managing risk or minimizing like financial loss. Really, this is a fundamental question of trust, because any decline in trust, whether it's real or perceived, really becomes a direct threat to your top line performance. And this is one reason why we see so much C-level interest in this. So yeah, so where do you start, right? What does this all mean? Well, there are some fundamental requirements to look for, when choosing security products, that, to try to identify how well aligned they are to this philosophy and how they'll help you, enable that strategy. Well, first, a central tenet to Zero Trust is having, as I mentioned before, coordination and orchestration across all of your various threat prevention, detection, and response capabilities. And this is made a lot easier when you have tools that integrate, right? Pretty much common sense. For instance, if your a mobile device security solution indicates a risky, behavior or configuration, right? Access to certain enterprise applications and data should really be limited, right? Until that risk returns to a baseline. And this requires you to, build, more integration across those layers, as I mentioned, right? But you don't want to be stuck with kludgy integrations that add little value. That's why it's really important to do proper due diligence on all of your purchases beforehand. And you also want to deploy quickly, right? And ideally with no additional tech investment. And the security products that I work with sometimes take weeks or months of professional services to implement. But it's ideally that won't be the case, right? It's unlikely to be universally adopted, if this is the case, especially as time goes on, right? Easy deployment is key. And your security should never, well, first I'll back up, right? Your security should first be consistently applied, right? Across all devices that access any company resources that might be sensitive, right? Any device or browser, mobile or not. And really, as data spreads across, what we call the extended enterprise, right, into, those blind spots that I mentioned before, right, or untrusted network segments, you need to make sure that your security controls, extend to that edge, right, wherever they may be. And multiple isolation levels, right, aligned with, whether it's device, network, user, data risk. You need to preserve that, that native user experience, and that really is key, right? If you upset IT ops, it's going to hold back adoption, right? And ultimately, compliance will suffer because users will work around it, like I mentioned before. And phishing and web-based attacks are also pretty common. They're top vectors today into the organization, frankly, and you can't ignore web and email threats, right? They have to be accounted for in your risk assessments, and ideally with appropriate controls to mitigate those risks. And finally, your security tool must enable forensics. You have to continuously evaluate risk through behavioral detection, right? This is really fundamental to a zero trust strategy. This isn't always possible with with a mobile security solution, right? But basic log and security event data can help inform risk, right? And what your appropriate levels of access should be. So it's also worth focusing a bit on the alignment, between network and data strategies, right? As I mentioned, defending the perimeter, it's not effective, right? Zero trust helps you implement methods to really isolate those threats through microsegmentation. And this doesn't have to just be at the network level, right? It can also apply at the device. And ideally, you tie those two together, right, through policies. And deep visibility also helps you here, right, into your estate, right, your network and device assets. This helps you just take a more organized approach to identifying those threats and limiting the impact of a breach. You also want to look to network-based security tools that enforce network segmentation at an appreciable level I mean, this is kind of out of scope of what we're talking about today, and I'd encourage anyone listening to go see some of Chase's research on this topic. But just to maybe give an example, right? Your endpoint security solution should ideally inform network controls or network access layers, right, based on that point in time risk, right, and vice versa. And maybe going one step further, your data security controls need to be aligned with those network security policies, right? You want to be able to inventory, classify, ideally obfuscate and archive or maybe delete, depending on your policy, right, all of that data, right? But that really starts again with visibility. So, okay, now let's talk a bit about some actual real-world examples of how a zero-trust strategy can protect your employees, right, from some common attack scenarios. So, okay, now let's talk a bit about some actual real-world examples of how a zero-trust strategy can protect your employees, right, from some common attack scenarios. All right, so first up here we have enterprise data theft from a personal device. Considering just how many people are using their personal devices these days to access company resources, right, while working from home, this is becoming an increasingly common scenario. So in this example, we'll see an attacker leveraging a consumer app, right, to deliver an exploit that gets root access to the device hardware. And we're assuming in this case that the device doesn't have any level of hardware isolation between the OS and the apps. And the attacker takes advantage of that lack of segmentation to move between the personal and corporate apps, and uses the exploited hardware, right? Maybe deliver an exploit through that compromised, that vulnerable personal application, right? And they use that exploit to then pull data from the enterprise app, right? Giving them free reign to steal data, either stored locally or maybe moving through the network connection. Right, this is a more advanced attack, but it is one that we've seen several times, both publicly and in our conversation with clients. And the point here is if you have a zero trust strategy in place, right, ideally segmentation between the enterprise and the corporate apps and the underlying hardware, right, you're less likely to be susceptible to this type of attack. And ultimately it's harder for the attacker to accomplish their goal, right? You create more friction for them. That's really key. Now we'll move on to the next scenario. Another common one, obviously today, is phishing. We see this every day. It's one of the most common methods, as I mentioned before, right, of infiltration by attackers. And we see, frequently spoofed login pages for an employee company resource, for example, tricking employees to enter their credentials, especially nefarious. But while that initial link might be blocked, right? If it's not really, a lot of security solutions end up falling kind of flat, right? Ultimately you need to include user behavior analysis here to identify, when a trusted user, right, may be acting in an untrusted way, right? Such as the case when an attacker has an employee credential and starts to try to move laterally through the organization. But ultimately, if you have tracking abilities, right? If you have that context around the alert, as the attacker pivots to other devices, your response should be automatic, and it should step down access to resources, to sensitive company resources, right? Just to again limit that risk. And ideally, this should happen really automatically, right? I mean, think about ransomware. If delivering an exploit that delivers a malware ransomware kit, right? This is not, you can't wait for an admin to make a determination, right? To validate that alert to take action. It needs to be automatic. And really, aside from ransomware, right? This really should just occur regardless of the security event, right? Right, because as the user's behavior changes, right, their risk level changes. And if you're tracking that, you can just make a better prediction as to risk and maybe some of your security controls and policies. We have one more. We'll talk about mobile malware here. So malware created specifically for mobile device, it's been rising in prominence definitely over the years. we've seen malware spanning iOS, Android, even IoT embedded devices, right? It's everywhere. And it can come really in the form, of a malicious app, maybe a malicious SMS message directed at a user, right? To send them to an exploit kit or a spoofed login page, like I mentioned before, right? Ideally, security, expresses quite a bit of concern over this, especially lately. But if you institute multiple layers of isolation on the device, right, and appropriately, just step up or down controls based on that risk, there's less likelihood that malware, will be able to accomplish their goals, frankly. And these can be default deny policies, right, allowing only known apps, right, to run. It can also include like application isolation measures that prevents high risk apps from behaving improperly. Um, Behavioral detection capabilities, can also help enforce a default deny policy. Blocking through forensics and network security tools, for example. But ultimately, if you have the visibility and control over the device environment, that's really critical. And untrusted applications like malware, it's less likely for them to be able to run, with less privileges. And this ultimately, again, allows you to just reduce the risk of the device from getting, compromised by malware. All right, next slide, please. Yeah. So before I turn this back over to Keith to just give Samsung's perspective on all this, let's talk a little bit about what Zero Trust means for you, and I'll end with some recommendations. So first, yeah, clearly, right, Zero Trust will help you stop that malware propagation, as we've just seen. It's also going to help you just eliminate that lateral movement, right, between corporate and between different corporate assets and personal and corporate, right? Whether we're talking about an IoT device, a personal device, or whatever, right? The end goal is you want to have complete visibility throughout your network, right? So you can see these pockets of untrusted segments, let's say. And this ultimately will help you reduce your time to breach, right? To breach detection. So if you have this proactive posture, it allows you to spend less time on like detection and response. That's ultimately you want to reduce that time to containment ultimately. It also helps you reduce capital and just investments into more and more security tools and just operational expenditures, right? On security. It also gives you an ability to just know where your toxic data is, right? It gives you more situational awareness over your data, right? How your data moves in and out of these assets, how it's used, how it's needed, where it's needed. And this ultimately will help you stop, right, the exfiltration of toxic data. Now we'll finish up here with some high-level recommendations that I think all of you can use to begin down this path of Zero Trust. So first, embrace the positive security model, right? Don't look for the malicious, right? Assuming everything else is good. This is the negative security model, and it's proven itself pretty ineffective over the years. Positive security assumes that everything is bad until it's proven otherwise. And we've seen companies embrace hardware root of trust, for example, right? Especially lately. It's implemented in a way that provides secured areas of the hardware with known or predictable security levels, and isolation and segmentation doesn't have to just be at the network level, right? It's beneficial at the device, hardware, app, and data levels as well. And I'll say it again. The bottom line is don't assume trust, whether it means an executable, an app, user, or general privilege level. And second, you want to have the right endpoint security control to immediately apply isolation in real time. Again, thinking back to the ransomware example, right? Reporting on ransomware is pretty useless without automatic blocking. This brings me to number 3, device management. It can be pretty helpful, and pretty critical today, especially, to help inform risk and enforce, secure configuration of those devices. And, data from that layer can help just your overall security posture or security analysis, right? By correlating that with real-time behaviors reported by your threat detection stack. Because ultimately, once you understand your environment, you can then, identify and, apply the appropriate levels of control over your most sensitive assets. And then last but not least, bring all your analysis together using a trusted partner to correlate data, network, and user behavior levels. And this can inform, security enforcement beyond the device, in areas like the network and workloads. So just to finish off here, ultimately your journey is going to require many small steps. And, this all begins with just letting go of all those trust assumptions and, working with your colleagues over in IT ops and network security to build out a security strategy that really increases the friction for the attacker, right? Not your employees or your security admin. And with that, I'd like to pass the ball over to Keith. Keith?
Thanks, Chris. That was great. Definitely learned things I had not seen in that perspective before. Appreciate you sharing us your zero touch strategy. It's kind of interesting. I've been with Samsung for 7 years. I started on the Knox team when it was first launched in 2013. And I really believe Samsung was embracing the zero touch philosophy, zero trust philosophy at that stage. And one of the things that was interesting was when we looked at, from a manufacturer's perspective, what was our responsibility or onus to the market, we tried to come up with how could we provide a hardware plus software solution so that we could help within the ecosystem. And again, that started with our Knox product line, and it's been a pleasure being a part of that. And so listening to your zero trust strategy, it's pretty exciting because I think we're really aligned. Now, what's funny is from my perspective, when we deal with customers, everything is around kind of the customer's journey. And so you brought up some really great points. And I think administrators and other IT professionals not only need to hear it, but need to start acting on it. But what's interesting is we're all in the business of serving our customers, whether it's our C-level, whether it's our end users, or whether it's our actual end customers. And the customer journey has always kind of dictated when, where, why, and how. And when Knox was first released in 2013, it was really a must because of, if you were to look at mobile devices and their operating systems, Android did not have the name for being the most secure operating system in the environment. So Samsung, to pivot, decided from a hardware manufacturing perspective, we could put that core element, that core hardware root of trust, as you alluded to, and give some type of hardware-backed software solution. And the customer journey started off in those days. We were kind of pioneering and kind of changing the market, and even getting the operating system providers to step it up a level and start to follow with us on providing a more secure OS and some more components. I will tell you today, and what we're calling kind of the new norm, things have changed to a whole nother level, and the customer journey has adapted. Digital transformation is no longer a choice, really. It's a sink or swim scenario. And there's a partner of ours that uses the term remote right, and I love this philosophy. As we are seeing more work from home, as we are seeing more social distancing occurring when it comes to your personal life as well as your work life, we're seeing that the customer journey is starting to have a shift or an adjustment made to it. And the mobile device is becoming a prevalent device and IT object to be used to help you get back to work and to help you be successful. So from our perspective, when we're dealing with customers, very similar to what you were just presenting, we have to approach it with a zero trust philosophy and help them get devices that the user doesn't have to be relied upon. The user just uses the device to better themselves at doing their job, but the zero trust and security is inherent. And so from a Samsung perspective, of course, that's our Knox suite. And just so if I'm using terms, we're all kind of on the same page. What we decided to do was create this hardware plus software total solution and build some framework and foundational pieces that we would provide some product as well as extensively work outside in the ecosystem with other solutions as well. So it always started at our platform level. And we took that and saw what on the Android operating system was occurring and figured we could create a kind of a foundational piece. And then whether you use Android for Enterprise or other solutions, those could be segments allowed within this foundational piece tied to some hardware security so that you would know the integrity of that device is secure. And then you can move forward and utilize that device with some assurance. Again, very zero trust from the start. And then we looked at, in that customer journey, how are we going to help from the incarnation of getting that device configured, enrolled, deployed, to the transition to managing it, protecting it from other attacks that, as you alluded to, whether they were outside working in attacks or insider working out attacks. And to be honest, the thing we find most is insider threat is far more dangerous than the outside threat, because a privileged user's capabilities, even whether it's on purpose or not, can be radically destructive. So we try to take this approach with zero touch of putting in these components so that you get the data isolation, where they get the application separation and other security inherently, so the user can't circumvent that. And then we're now finding more than ever services and support. There are plenty of options if you want to buy a device on the market, if you want to digitally enable your company. But there are risks. There are risks of whether that device comes with that security first mentality. And there's risks whether when you buy that device, will you get an enterprise level of support. And so what's interesting for us is we think one of the industries that's being impacted right now the hardest is the SMB, small and medium businesses. These are folks that are right now trying any way they can to adjust their business philosophies, whether it's curbside pickup, whether it's utilizing a third party to deliver their product, but whatever they can do to go from maybe being a current retail shop, transitioning almost to a .com business and do e-commerce, or a hybrid of both. And so for us, we know that Samsung offers quite a few choices and product. So to simplify that, you may have heard, we just launched our new Knox suite. And that's really to go after and assist these companies that are in need right now, that are looking for ways to get their workforce back out there and need something that is easy to procure, but also comes with all the different features and options they'll need throughout that customer journey, so that they're securing, deploying, and managing those devices in the best way for business. Now, I've given a lot of data. I've shown a lot of eyesore screenshots. What I like to do is change the discussion a little bit into some real life scenarios. I use the term change the conversation. This is true inside organizations we're finding and outside. And myself and my team see this on a daily basis. When it came to a digital transformation or a hardware choice 10, 15 years ago, people were focused on the what, kind of what was going on with that device. Did it have a keyboard physically or not? How long would the battery work? How bright was the screen? Today, it's completely changing. And this transformation has been happening for a while, but with this new norm, it's almost a necessity now. And that is, people choose devices based on applications. They choose devices based on specific software that helps them better their business. And then they're going to choose the device that runs it the best and the safest. Preferably they get both, but that's kind of the challenge. And we're seeing this shift in scales where people used to always ask, is it secure or is it convenient? And it seemed you had to choose between the two. Whereas now, you take a zero trust posture, but you enable it properly, maybe you can change the scales and give them both. And that's kind of what the conversation's changing to, where it's really focused on how are you going to help an organization do something special so that they can utilize this technology, because no longer will they maybe have the luxury of going into a secure facility, accessing an IT help desk that might be physically there for them to reach out to. It's becoming much more remote user accessible. It's becoming a work from home environment. It's becoming from maybe even if you return to the office, keeping a social distance. So now the scenario has shifted to all these new devices, as you called it, shadow IT, sprouting up everywhere, where we're seeing mobile devices, whether provided by the industry or corporation, to the devices provided by the user. Because as you know, a user will do whatever they have to do to get their job done, whether it's blessed by IT or not. So this is a scenario of why I think people should really care about what we're discussing today, that corporations from all levels need to start thinking about it, because times have changed and these new endpoints are coming from every direction. So IoT is going to take off to the extreme. So let me give a real case story, something I think kind of sums this all up. It was a few months back, maybe almost a year, where I met with a large produce provider. Now, this company, what they decided to do over a year ago was digitally transform to where they would provide tablets to the grocery chains so that they could make real-time live orders for their produce needs. And they could do it through the tablet that was provided to them. Now, when they made their choice of hardware, it was not with Samsung. They wanted to go with something at a lower price point that didn't come with any technical support. and was something that they could just roll quickly. And it was interesting, when they did that, they saw immediate benefit, of course. They went to a digital transformation. They were able to get orders quicker, faster. They were able to control their inventory and provide a better SCM so that they had their supply chain working to their advantage. And the profits went up, and it justified the cost of the infrastructure they were paying. When I met with them, why I say it changed the conversation is, instead of trying to present to them a device, instead of trying to talk to them about the what, it really changed the conversation into the why, saying, hey, you're ahead of the curve. You're digitally transforming. You've been doing it for over 6 months. What are some of the lessons you learned? What's the good, bad, and ugly? Why are you happy with this investment or not? And what was interesting is when they got through the positives and then shifted to some of the negatives, and they were quick to say that even these negatives did not outweigh the positives, but they were something they were going to be measured by. There were 3 things that came up. They said the first thing that came up was the shipping costs. That they were in a scenario that every time they would provide a device to the grocery chain, they would have that device shipped to their office, provided to their IT shop. Their IT shop would spend anywhere from 3 to 5 days configuring, designing, or setting up that device for its purpose-built scenario, then shipping it a second time to get it out to the grocery chain. And the problem with that scenario was, besides shipping costs being high, it required a lot of IT time. The next thing they found in their first 6 months was the theft of the device was high. They were having a 33% theft rate in the first 6 months. I asked them, how did you handle when you lost the device? They said, we would just ship another one out. So we get one shipped in, work on it, get it shipped out, replace the device. So now they were having 33% hardware turnover on first 6 months basis. That's pretty high. The next thing I asked them was, how was it working from a user perspective, from the customer's perspective? And they were saying, well, the hardship we're having right now is to run that purpose-built device, they utilize a custom app. And we see this predominantly in all of our customers. But they are creating, they even have their own app development shops that they don't outsource it. But they're building these custom apps because it's the apps that's driving the business. And they're putting those custom apps on these devices to do the purpose of ordering produce. And he explained that one of the issues they run into is when an operating system update goes up or a patch, the device can sometimes go offline or completely blow the app apart to where it doesn't work. And now they're in the scenario of having that device shipped back, going through IT again, and then returning shipment to get it back to the customer. Again, a lot of cost in shipping, a lot of time in IT, and more importantly, it puts the customer or the grocery chain going back to the old system of doing it by hand or other means while waiting for this device to come back. Now, these were all different issues they had. And again, we talked about them. There was shipping, there was IT time, and then there was this custom app breakage and theft of the devices. So in this conversation, what we started to discuss was, and knowing what I just showed you from the solution offering that's now available, we wanted to change the conversation a little bit and talk to them about, hey, what if you had a solution that when you go into your systems, you can create a profile digitally, and when your grocery chains make a process order or need a device, you drop ship from distribution straight to them. You've now cut off half your shipping costs because the device doesn't need to come to you. It can go straight to them. Your IT has created a profile that's digital and can go over the air to lock that device into its purpose-built mode and load your third-party app so that the look and feel control of that device is specific to the purpose of that grocery chain. But with a zero trust mentality of no circumvention, even if you hardware reset that device, it will come back to that exact look and feel. My prediction to them was theft will go down. Because if the grocery chains know that they're going to get a new device every time one goes missing, and it's so easy to just reset the device they originally had purchased and give it to a user, you're just supplying their families, their kids, their friends, or whoever else walks to the store a nice new device that they're going to use for their own purpose. But with a zero trust, secured, locked down by Samsung Knox solution, you'll push that configuration over the air. And even if the device is hardware reset, the moment it's turned back on, it comes back to that same look and feel. So now when a device goes missing, you've just brought online a new produce order because that person is all they're going to be able to do is order your produce. My guess is theft will go down. People won't want the device because it's only good for the grocery chain and their business purpose. Next thing, let's talk about these OS updates. You should have control of when an OS update goes to your enterprise device. That is an enterprise device, not a consumer. This is B2B. So if you want to lock that down, again, we will help you with a solution that's going to allow you to stage those type of updates, to lock the device from taking an update until you've had time to prove it works with your third-party app. So that if you need to update the third-party app first, you can. And then stage those updates to when it's an off-peak hours, time when the users aren't necessarily going to need the device, so that you don't have any issues at the most highest production time. We challenged this customer to at least pilot it and just see if anything came to fruition. What was exciting was immediately upon utilizing this type of solution, this type of scenario, this zero trust strategy, they saw theft rate go from 33% to below 3%. That was huge, huge dollar savings. Second thing they found is by cutting the shipping costs in half, the exact comment I got 4 months later was just the savings in shipping costs paid for everything we implemented from a software and support strategy. And of course, having a real enterprise solution of services and support was something that they hadn't had before and allowed them to customize and change and do things even more optimally. And with a digital solution, if they decided to change something at the grocery train level or that solution, they never needed to get the device back. They were able to digitally over the air make those adjustments real-time live. So they ended up finding new ways to further their business than they even thought was digitally possible. So again, this was us having a real good conversation about the why. Now that's a corporate scenario. I can't begin to tell you all the other scenarios, including federal government, state and local, but one that really touched me when I heard this one and was a part of it. If you would have been at the Samsung Developers Conference last November in San Jose, my general manager, Tahir Bedahani, told a story, and it's one that's important to talk about. In California, there's been over 8,500 fires just in the last year alone. So fires are escalating, lives are in danger, homes are in jeopardy, a lot of different scenarios going on. This is a little bit different than what we're seeing from a commercial side, where it might be a save your job. This is a save a life. And so this takes a lot of, in our opinion, importance and something that we need to do at the highest level. And zero trust becomes important because here at this fire department in a town in California, they implemented a drone technology tied to a mobile device so that they could actually track fires in a much more sophisticated way to prevent putting firemen in harm, as well as knowing where to send these folks to do their job the most efficient to protect families and homes. Could you imagine if that device took an update and locked out while firemen's in the middle of one of the biggest fires raging? I mean, we're not talking now about shipping costs. We're talking about something much more worse. So again, having that conversation of saying, let's talk about how we're going to digitally transform you. We're going to take a zero trust mentality. We're going to put into your hands a mobile device that maybe you didn't recognize was more than what you thought it could do, and actually add a value to what you do on a daily basis. And at the end of the day, let's do this together so that we see that success and we see that saving of lives. And so really proud moment, and it was exciting to do it. Now, I'd like to wrap up saying, where do we go from here? What is that call to action? What do we want to do? And in my opinion, whether it's with Samsung or not, customers need to really focus on the ecosystem and reach out for help. Talk to people who have done this before. Have the conversation with Chris or myself or our teams where we have battle experience of going in and digitally transforming, utilizing a secure first mentality and getting people these devices so that they can remote write in today's day and age. And what we're seeing just in the last 6 weeks is, digital health, food delivery, manufacturing, getting people back to the plant where they can control their social distancing, whether it's with a wearable or their phone. Being able to be notified if your social distancing posture is good, bad, or where it could be improved. Worst case scenario, what if you put yourself into a situation at work where there was someone who may be sick or had received an infection? Could you be notified that you might have had a risk and you need to be tested? These are things that taking the mobile device to a whole nother level. But more importantly, empowering your users in a safe manner where they can't circumvent it or cause you unneeded harm and improve their production. So that's kind of a look and a feel from my team's perspective. Appreciate everything you had to say, Chris. There's great information there. I think we're actually in synergy, even though we didn't plan that out before. It's been exciting to see that Forrester and Samsung seem to be on the same page. So I appreciate that. And I know I went fast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Matt. It's been my pleasure too. Exciting conversation. Look forward to following up with you in the future to hear what's next.